Hello, everybody. You're very, very welcome to this webinar. We decided to run this webinar because a concerned parent had written a very extensive and helpful tool that we think could really help families, and we all know families need help. And this tool is also beneficial in its own way. So it's beneficial in its own right because the idea is that you ask family and friends to complete a survey. And when they do, it will inherently encourage them to think about what's going on and to think about, so in a way, it's bringing them into the conversation. We've had some really interesting and surprising responses around it where, families and friends that people thought weren't on board ended up being very on board as a result of the survey, or it turns out that they thought something different than what the parent expected. And we do know that parents are struggling. This is more pain than I've faced in 20 years as a psychotherapist, and I include detransitioners with that. There's something about the parents' pain that seems to be a whole different quality. And so we want to help in any way we can, and we think this is practical, but we know the parents are exhausted and demoralized and often feel powerless. So the idea of this is it's an evergreen recording. I'm delighted that there's lots of people who've joined us in the live recording, and you'll be able to just get out the survey and kind of go at it with this. You'll be fully equipped if you just listen to this webinar. We've got two concerned parents, the writer of the survey and also somebody who's been very interested in it. And one of them, a mother, is going to speak her way through these slides that we've done up. But we very much encourage you to put in Q&A. We're going to give time to Q&A. We want to address any questions assiduously. And so please put them in as and when you see them, because we want to attend to it. Now, I'm going to move it over now to the concerned parent who's going to work through the slides.
Hello, Stella. Hi, good to be here. So just a little bit of an introduction. I've started to become interested in this topic, in the whole gender thing, maybe 2 years ago. And before then, I just naively assumed that trans identity is about gender non-conforming behavior. And that's all it is. And I haven't thought deeply about the medical side of things. So I assumed that boys who don't really like rugby very much, or girls who don't like wearing heels, dresses, are those people. And it didn't occur to me to really think deeply or understand better what makes those people look, not just in terms of clothing and names, but physically different, and what's involved behind the scenes in there. And I assumed that gender care is just like any other area of medicine. I'm very familiar with neurodiversity, with autism and ADHD, and I thought that there is a thorough assessment, like there would be for autism, for example. In this case, that there would be psychotherapy offered, and that there is a typical, in other medical fields, just a benefit to risk ratio explored fully, and full informed consent given. And none of these things are really true. I think those assumptions are so valid, and I think that's why so many people don't quite understand what is going on, because isn't it natural to expect that gender care area operates just like any other area of medicine, and it doesn't quite. It seems that diagnosis is more like a self-diagnosis. It seems that psychotherapy isn't really offered as a matter of routine, or not at all, and that the medical interventions don't have strong evidence base, so that benefit is very difficult to understand and articulate. So that was kind of my thinking, and I read a lot in general about it to try and understand and get clear in my head what's going on. But at one point, it became actually quite depressing and quite sad to keep reading and reading and reading. And I felt I'm not really learning as much new stuff anymore. However, this article that's on the screen, The Girl in the Tinkerbell Dress, was different for me. I was quite pleased that I haven't missed that I read it, because it offered this practical way of being able to talk about this subject better with family and friends, and gender clinics, to raise concerns And it just offered something beyond that understanding. It offered a hope for change more. So that's where I'm coming from. And then, so this, you can talk more about that, Stella, but the survey is available on the website, and there are multiple sort of parts of it. It consists of different pages. The shortest one is a single A4 sheet called a parental survey, where all questions are yes and no. It is literally possible to complete this in 5 minutes. No exaggeration there, really super simple. And the suggestion here is, if parents fill it in and send it to Gender Clinic, that's one way of raising concerns and asking that main question. With this in mind, with these things that we are raising and observing as parents, and we know our child really well, does the Gender Clinic still believe that the medical pathway is the right way to go? And it may or may not work, but it's always possible to follow it up with a more sort of thorough letter, a full survey later when there is time. Full survey is longer. It's about 5 pages of questions. Again, most of them are yes, no, unsure. They don't really require anybody to write essays and put in a lot of effort. My perception is it's probably about 1-2 hours to complete, maybe more time to think, though, because some of these questions are really, they do make you think, and many people want to consider them properly. So that might be extra time. And it's aimed at handing this survey, not just to parents, but to 12 different participants, people who knew the person in question, the young person most often that we are talking about here. And so that's 1 to 2 hours and 12 participants. There are sections to these 5 pages. There are some questions about the present, questions to the effect of, is this person behaving in gender non-conforming ways now? Are they wearing clothing that's more typically associated with the opposite sex right now? And then there are similar questions about the past, about the childhood. Has this person in early childhood been known to play with toys that are typically associated with the opposite sex, or wearing clothes that are typically associated with the opposite sex, and so on? So it's about observations. They shouldn't really be very hard questions to answer. You're only asking these people to tell in the survey what they already know, what they have seen or haven't seen. And if they don't know or they haven't seen, they can just put that. It's not anything beyond that. It's just observations. And there are questions about the broader context, what's happened in family and environment. Is there any indication of social isolation or internet addiction or something like autism or any other conditions that might be relevant? There is a page about informed consent, which lists all the side effects of possible medicalization, and it asks at the bottom of that page whether the person who's filling it in, whether the person thinks that a medical pathway is a good way to go, given this information. And in the end, there are profile questions, things like how old this person who's filling in the survey is, and what their previous job was, or whether they're religious or not. And that's just to illustrate that the survey is submitted by different people, and so some people might be religious and others not, and things like that, just to see how that forms a clinically significant picture. The survey is based on DSM-5 diagnostic criteria, and I think that provides a really useful structure, because in some sense, with these concerns that parents might have, that they want to raise with the Gender Clinic, it's a little bit hard to know where to start, because so often for families, they are so just blindsided with everything, and it just, what is being said by the doctors and by the young person is in complete conflict with what the family is observing and not consistent with what they know about the child, and they know the child really well. So it's really difficult to know where to start. But I don't know if you want to mention anything about DSM-5 and how that maps onto what doctors are using, Stella.
It depends on the clinic. Some are using DSM-5, but when we have a world that is taking pretty zealous children's word who are rewriting history, it sometimes it feels a little bit, irrelevant. Also, I just want to point out to people that the DSM-5, it was very much divided into 4 adults, 4 children, and they never accounted really for the adolescent cohort. So the DSM-5 doesn't have an adolescent criteria. It has children or an adults. And I strongly believe that, well, if they were going to go forward, if they chose to, they needed to have an adolescent cohort, because there would be different answers, it would be different questions. And right now, I think, am I right in thinking 5 out of 8 of the questions for the children's refer to stereotypical behavior? Frankly, aggressive 1950s, questions about toys and playmates and behaviors that would be considered boyish or girlish, but probably none of that did you need to hear, so carry on.
No, where I'm coming from, I was so surprised that when you go on NHS website and, like for any other condition, you would want to know what are the diagnostic criteria for this condition? How is this assessment happening? How do people determine or create a test or assessment to figure out whether someone has or doesn't have a gender dysphoria? And there's absolutely nothing on an NHS website that is of any value, really. And that's just unbelievable, really. It feels like a lot of this diagnosis is a self-diagnosis and doesn't follow.
Well, can I add to that, just now that we've spoken about it? I would say if people did see the diagnostic criteria more often on the DSM, and if you haven't, I urge you to look at it, their eyebrows would raise very fast and say, what is this? This is regressive stereotyping. There's very little, when you look at it, it's a far cry from the diagnostic criteria for, let's say, eating disorders or for other, you know what I mean? You go, oh, wow, this is very different. Culturally shaped views on behavior and attitudes, and you know what I mean, that I can see why the NHS doesn't put it on their website, because it's a very regressive piece of a document.
That's an interesting point as well, because yes, I was kind of in my earlier comments saying that, if someone hasn't played with the toys of the opposite sex and so on, that just blindsides the family. But of course, if a boy played with dolls as a child, then so what? Does that warrant medicalization? So it's an interesting topic, all these diagnostic criteria and how good or not.
I was that kid.
And then a few words on Dutch protocol that I wanted to mention is just that with this survey, essentially what the parent and the family can build is the patient profile. And to my knowledge, but correct me or pitch in, Stella, if I'm wrong here, but in Dutch protocol, the patient profile, people who are selected for that study that is the cornerstone of gender feminine care, those patients had no comorbidities. They didn't have autism, or mental health difficulties or something else like a personality disorder or some other problems, because they were specifically selected for this study so that the research can take place and you can isolate, just for the purposes of the research, one single thing, which is gender dysphoria, or potential gender dysphoria. So no comorbidities. And then all of the people in that study had observable signs of gender dysphoria in early childhood, not how they feel about this now, actually something that family and friends have noticed and was clearly happening. All of them did. And those patients had family support who were on board that there is something going on here that needs investigating, researching, and so on. And that, I think that for many families who are using the survey, the picture that they are building through that survey, the patient profile that emerges through the results is very different. It's not matching that Dutch protocol profile, and therefore conclusions that have been made for those patients earlier perhaps aren't as applicable or relevant for the person in question. And then in terms of the purpose of the survey, why would anyone want to do it, and what are families looking to achieve through it, is the first on the most basic level, it's just to provide missing information. There is a wide concern, and I think most people would agree, and I would almost want to believe that even gender clinics would agree, that the process is rushed and the information that is collected is very patchy. And not everything is in there. It's usually just self-reports from the patient themselves, not cross-checked through any other sources. Again, if you compare that to neurodiversity assessment, that's quite different usually. During neurodiversity assessment for autism or ADHD, other people would be consulted and would be asked to provide information. So that's the first bullet point. And then creating audit trail. What happened when? How did this referral take place? On the basis of what information? And what do we know? What can we document about how things are now? I think that's really important in case the correct process hasn't been followed, either for referral or for assessment or for medicalization. Then that's really important to document. In terms of legal angles to this, I would say that the things to focus on are potential breach of duty of care. If ignoring patients' needs can result in potential breach of duty of care, it can result in misdiagnosis, it can result in medical negligence. All those things, somebody who later regrets the decision or the medical pathway can use in legal way. From family and friends and parents' point of view, the other alternative is a potential for a judicial review, where it's not the individual case that is being looked at, but the whole process, whether that's good enough and robust. So that's the second reason. But also, I think for many parents, it's about a sanity check. It's about getting it clear in your own head and processing, again, what happened, when it happened, what hasn't happened perhaps, but you're told by the young person that it has done. So seeking clarity, making notes and putting words to the whole traumatic experience that the family is going through. In terms of healing yourself as a parent or a family, I think that's super important as well. And again, some of the responses from the survey from other people might be really, really helpful in a way that, perhaps is unpredictable or not quite expected, where somebody says that, I don't know, yes, I've noticed that this person was so much more relaxed before their decision to transition, and now they are not happy, they're distressed. Or somebody might say that it came out of the blue and there were no signs that anyone could see before a particular point in time. And hearing it from other people and having it in writing, I think is quite powerful. And the last point about rebuilding relationships and starting conversations. A lot of parents are isolated because talking about this subject is so heavy, it's so hard, it takes time. It's very difficult to do over a cup of coffee. It really needs a dedicated conversation. And doing it over and over again with different people can be just exhausting. Whereas, so some family members might not even be aware of what has been going on because for a parent, it's just too difficult and too tiring to share and they never got around to it. So a survey can help to start those conversations and rebuild relationships with some family members and offer that survey as a starting point. And it takes you to quite a lot of depth without the parent themselves having to explain, to actually go through all the heavy stuff that is there. And then this is the page with the question about informed consent and whether a family member or a friend thinks that the medical pathway is the right way to go. I think this is very illuminating and certainly something that most people who are not close to this subject have no idea that this is the case, and that's why it's so powerful in terms of starting conversations. So to me, that's the most useful page out of the 5 pages of the full survey, and that page alone can be so helpful in understanding what's going on and discussing it with others and raising concerns. So results of the survey, this is a hypothetical fictional example, but it might look something like this. So if we, for example, zoom into the past subsection of part 1, where there's a sea of red there, no, that is a potential hypothetical example of people saying, no, we haven't observed this person displaying behaviors that would be typically associated with the opposite sex. And having it like that, again, is powerful, both for just the parent to know what is happening or not happening, but also helpful as just data and evidence of what is observed by people who are close to this person. So this survey can be used as evidence to send to raise concerns with the gender clinic. And what people are then doing is adding a letter from the parent, raising concerns and saying, and evidence of these concerns is in the results of the survey. And if there's anything additional, like there might be an assessment, an autism assessment that's already taken place in the past, or something else that evidences similar things, then that can be filed as well as evidence. So in that cover letter, essentially, what parents can talk about is, was the referral process sensible? Was there any information, any questions asked, or was it just, oh, you want to be referred to gender clinic, here you go, and that's the extent of it? Is that valid? Is there clinical justification in a referral like that? Does it actually follow your process? So everything that is gathered through the survey, so signs or no signs of gender incongruence in early childhood, additional things like social isolation, internet addiction, autism, ADHD, mental health, trauma, all these things can be summarized as, something that is also going on and must be taken into account in a holistic way and be overall needs of that person, of that patient, need to be accounted for. Physical health is something that, again, very often is a complete gap, that very often young people, adolescents, don't really know the medical history of their family in full, and without somebody else helping them to fill in that information, there's just no information whatsoever. And some of the medical interventions that gender clinics provide, the risks are so much higher if there is medical history of things like diabetes or thrombosis, and there are certain conditions that are really important to know about. And limitations of gender affirming approach, cost review, asking questions whether in this gender clinic senior doctors and clinicians are aware of this and who's representing that view, and are they following the practices, the best practices. So when writing that letter, one of the barriers and one of the issues that parents face is what pronouns to use and what name to use. And the first thing to say about that, because many parents are just writing and rewriting and thinking, what is the right thing to do and what is the best way to get to both medical professionals and just everybody really about the concerns that they're trying to raise. And it's essential that there are facts there, that there is the sex and the gender are mentioned so that we know who we are talking about exactly. Again, preferred name can be mentioned, birth name can be mentioned, just so that everyone's on the same page who we are talking about. And then in terms of pronouns to be used throughout the letter, some people land on birth pronouns, some on preferred pronouns, some think that a compromise might be to use they and them, although of course they and them might be the preferred pronouns as well. But some other ideas could be to use initials, if that's, again, easier. And that's what psychologists are used to in their reports. Neurodiversity reports are written often in that way. That sometimes can be just easier to do. And one more option is just to have 3 copies of the same letter and provide different pronouns in each, and just provide an introduction saying that whichever version of these pronouns is best for you or whoever is reading this report, that a copy of that letter is available. But just, it's a valid challenge, really. And it's a shame that because of it, things are extra hard in terms of raising concerns and just create these difficulties.
Can I just come in on that and say, parents find the name and the pronouns really, really hard. I do think if you just confront that, you'll get through the survey. And so, there's an argument to be made to make the decision, put in at the beginning, say, this is about my child, born, date of birth, this is their birth sex, this is their preferred gender, this is their preferred pronouns. For this document I will be using. And you just designate something and move on, because it's one of those things that could be an obstacle to you doing it.
That's exactly my point. I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because it's almost like a writing block, isn't it? And if you accept that also, this is quite a long process of collecting this data through different participants and collating everything together, and it's emotionally draining as well. So if you stumble on something like this and just stop doing it, you might, that's not a good thing. And when people are writing, for example, a good writer, an experienced writer will know that they don't have to produce this perfect draft and complete final version straight away. The first draft might be just something. So again, if you want to just leave that decision until later and write the way is most comfortable for you first, and then, once everything is done, just go over it one more time, make a final decision, ready to send.
And can I say, a couple of parents I know did exactly what you just said. They wrote it with the name they wanted to use and the pronoun they wanted to use, and then at the end just changed that bit. If you follow me, that was the bit that they said, nah, I'll have to change that, and just did it at the end, just because they knew who they were dealing with and what they needed to do to get where they needed to go. People make their own decisions.
Yeah, and I think that there will be very different circumstances and families and situations and different decisions being made based on those circumstances. Who this letter with the survey results could be sent to. So Gender Clinic is obviously what we talked about, and that's the primary reason, the primary purpose. I would say, though, that, knowing how and what is happening in gender clinics, I would almost treat it as a FYI, like for information to Gender Clinic. There has been some success, hasn't it, Stella, for some other parents, where gender clinics have actually taken that on board, which is, to me, surprising, but really good to hear.
Yeah, I think people forget there's, arguably in a clinic of 10, there'll be maybe 2 or 3 zealots, maybe 4 or 5 who are going along, but, increasingly questioning, like the likes of Sarah Stockton and Jamie, and then 2 maybe who are, disaffected and who are unhappy and who are thinking, what am I in here? Now, they see your survey. You know what I mean? So, there's too many clinicians have just left, and they didn't blow the whistle. They just left. The high turnover of clinicians, the amount of clinicians I've met who just said, I got out of it, don't want to think about it, don't want to talk about it, not happy. There's plenty of disaffected in there. It's not just, the zealots are very loud, but the other people are arguably, you don't know what the mix of the clinic is.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a bit of an unknown, but then it's possible to think about this as a first step as well, and think about, who else will benefit from seeing this letter, and how can it be helpful. So other areas of medicine, so to speak, might see that problem with the process more sharply than the gender clinic itself. So GP who has referred the person to the gender clinic in the first place might want to be aware and know what happened, and it's useful to send a copy to GP. It might be a sanitized copy if that's more appropriate, depending on the level of detail that you're going into, and then just summarize and say that these are the concerns, and I think it's useful for GP for you to know. There's complaints department in all these NHS trusts, or there should be a complaints department in a private clinic, I would imagine. Integrated Care Board for NHS could be an organization to contact. Ombudsman, PHSO is another one. So just some ideas. And then again, if that version of concerns is sanitized further without referring in huge detail about what the trauma, for example, on neurodiversity refers to and so on, but just summarizing the overall concerns, that could be sent to many more people still. MP should be listening to what problems people are facing. The normal, what I would expect MP to do is to forward this to DHSC, to Department of Health and Social Care, pretty much straight away, rather than respond to you with some personal comments, because that's where it needs to be with DHSC. Then there are multiple politicians in the House of Commons and House of Lords who are aware of this issue and are working on this, so we'll be interested to know. Lawyers, again, judicial review negligence claims that we talked about. Journalists, if that's what you want to do, not every family, not every person wants to, but can be powerful if people are ready. Campaigners, so people like you, Stella, Genspect, there's parent groups, Our Duty, Basewater, there's Sex Matters, there's Transgender Trend, there's quite a few different organizations who are interested in what's going on and more willing to listen than some of the people who are involved in the actual process. And nothing's stopping you from going as far as you want to. Celebrities, Prime Minister, Royal Family.
Can I make a comment there? Yeah, it's interesting. Our parent group, a Genspect parent group that we know, is initially they ended up getting to visit the Pope last year, which was astonishing. So you never know who is receptive in whatever office. On that, though, however, I think it would be worth sending to health insurers. I think that could be a more practical rather than the Pope. That whoever is insuring, who are the actuaries behind the clinics, because if they get more than one, I know you could do a cover letter just saying this goes against the advice to transition. This clinic is actually transitioning. That's somebody who's quite assertive, but I would be for it. It's flagging to an insurance that bad practice is ongoing and somebody is watching it. You get a few of them in the door, and you would be kind of going, "What's going on here?"
Yeah, and the next one, and I think this is the most important sort of slide or topic about this survey, is confidentiality and risks. I think a lot of parents are concerned that if they write this letter and if the young person finds out that that's what's happened, that they might, the relationship will break down. They might be estranged. That the child, the young person, will not be able to reconcile this with their version of facts, if that makes sense. And particularly if we are talking about autistic young people, then that kind of fixation on a predetermined outcome really gets in the way of understanding that other people, particularly from a different generation, like your parents, might have a really different view and see health, physical health, and just general life events in a different light. So I think many parents would want this letter to be confidential between them and the gender clinic, and not to be shown to the patient in full as it was written. Although what you do want is for the information in there to be used to reassess the referral and medical pathway. So I suppose what can be done is, in that letter, parents can always explain who the letter is aimed for and who it should be read by and used, like the team who's working with this person. And it's also possible to make a request not to share it with the patient in full due to sensitive nature of this information and risk of family conflict, parental alienation, and estrangement. And I think that we are going back to how this area, gender care, isn't quite functioning like any other area of medicine. And that's the problem here, because I think typically you would just then trust the medical professionals to do the right thing, and you wouldn't worry about it excessively. But in this case, I think parents do, because there is a lot of medical malpractice, and there are things that are happening that shouldn't be happening, and that makes parents question everything and worry about what will or will not happen.
Can I say something about that? You know, gender clinics will be looking for opportunities to throw it in the bin. So just for my own input, my preference would be, this is addressed to, and you name the entire team. So the entire team therefore has to see it, because it'll be very quick that, you know, one I would say overzealous clinician would say, oh, it's private confidential. I've read it. I'm making a judgment call on that and I'm putting it aside. And I would rather everybody on the team has to see it because they have been named. That's one. Secondly, yeah, and I've seen a few questions in the chat that address that point. I think that there has been so much bad behavior, so much breaking of common, well-established rules about privacy and confidentiality. I don't feel comfortable in assuring people that when you seek privacy and confidentiality in this field, you get it, because I've heard too many, sadly, stories where the doctor inappropriately shared information that the parents specifically asked to keep confidential. And so I'd love to say that when you say private and confidential, it remains, but you know your clinic, I would say to the parent, be aware that some people are not playing by the commonly accepted rules, sadly.
Yeah. I suppose also in some of these letters, and when parents are raising concerns, the issue that it exists in its own right is the family breakdown. And if that is worded well in the letter, and it makes it obvious that actually before doing any medicalization, can we look at what happened in the family? And does this person need help with establishing connections, communication problems, and things like that? And that again can kind of illuminate this confidentiality issue at the same time, or add weight to it. But yeah, I think that's really useful what you just said, Stella, that, you know, we maybe wish that things were different, but the reality is what the reality is, and yeah, we need to be aware of that. So the risks are very real. There is a risk of increased relationship difficulties. There is a risk of possible estrangement, but that's not the only thing we are talking about here, not the only risk to consider. There is a risk of doing nothing, which means that gender clinics are likely to proceed with their gender affirming care, highly contested approach based on limited information. And if nothing is done about it, that's definitely how it will go ahead. There's no reason for gender clinic to even consider any other way. So there's something like that to consider as well, and just any other risks, because again, every situation will be different. If that risk of estrangement might push a young person towards seriously dangerous group of people, then again, you know, you have to sort of do your own risk assessment and think about what is the best next step, really.
Could I add something there? I agree with you. There's a risk in doing nothing, and people often think that doing nothing is not making a decision. It is making a decision. It's making the decision to do nothing, and that brings its own issues. But secondly, I do think there's an opportunity for this cohort. They're a certain type of person, as we all know, and there's something very clinical and organized about this survey that could appeal to them, although they might go mad because you used a certain name or pronouns or not. Arguably, it's not. Some people are looking for a rift, and there's going to create a rift, and they're going to say, you're dead to me, and they can estrange. That's always going to be a risk, and we can't downplay it. This is a cohort that are quick to find offence and behave dramatically. However, having said all that, there is there's something about the way this is structured that they could admit that it's clinical, it's detached, it's forensic. It appeals to their mindset. From what I know of these, and I know a lot about these people, it appeals to their mindset. And so it isn't necessarily the most devastating event if they see it. You could say, well, look, this is, I just filled it in. You know what I mean? And there is something to work with there.
There is. And I also think it's also useful to just point out that this behavior where some young people say, you either agree with me, you're affirm, or if you don't, that means you don't love me. There is an element of emotional blackmail in it, and you have to see it for what it is. And if you frame it in that way, then I think it's clearer. You can see more clearly what can or should be done about it. And I would also even say that the emotional blackmail element doesn't even come from the child, but through the child. They typically tend to pick up those messages online. It's from the people who are influencing them, sometimes people in authority, unfortunately. But I wouldn't put all the blame of this behavior on a young person, because they're typically repeating what someone else has said, and the whole concept of it is a bit toxic, and there is an element of emotional blackmail in it, but the child is sort of channeling it, and a child is a messenger rather than somebody who's created this whole narrative. And the third bullet point that I put here in the risks is that this process is emotionally draining. Many parents find it really hard. So on the one hand, there is a healing aspect of it where the clarity there is an increased clarity and increased understanding of what is happening, but that comes through hard work, difficult conversations, and it can be re-traumatizing. So again, depending on where the family is, a lot of parents are in this position where they are sandwiched between looking after children, sometimes younger children as well. This isn't always the only child that they're dealing with, and their own parents who are now older and perhaps need more attention and care and time at the same time. So what is possible, and how can this be done, and is it wise to do it when potentially there's many more demands on your time, emotionally and practically? So this is the last slide, and we can get to Q&A after this, but the last question that I wanted to leave the audience with is, does it work? And in my view, it does work, but it takes time. And the problem that we are facing is bigger than one individual or one family. And it's a medical scandal similar to other scandals that happened in the past. The Great Post Office scandal, the opioid crisis, the grooming gangs all have similar arc, and they are societal issues. And so one individual or one family can accelerate how the truth unfolds and what we can do as a society about it. But but whether that will help the family in good time or not is a bit of a question mark. And I just want to sort of in more detail just mention a few details of each, where I think in Post Office scandal there were so many parallels, because the sub-postmasters who were victims of the scandal and were accused unfairly of things they have never done, they did different things in response to that. Some said, here are a couple of thousands that you're saying I stole, and just go away. I want this to go away. I don't care that this is my own personal money. I just want this to disappear. That was one approach, not necessarily a helpful one, because sometimes these discrepancies continued and the problem worsened as a result. Some people had a completely different approach where they said, I don't know what this issue is about. I certainly haven't done anything wrong. Please bring your auditors and find out what is going on here. And, that might be more brave, but again, it hasn't helped in every situation and in every case. And it's only when that scandal came to the surface and the justice was sought for all of the victims that people that it helped everyone who were victims in there. And similarly, parents who have trans-identifying children, they try different things. Some are using preferred pronouns, some are using birth pronouns, some are more honest, and some are more compromising, and there isn't a pattern yet. There isn't a known way that one approach is better than the other, because the problem is so much bigger than each family in its own right. And Dope Sick is a documentary about opioid crisis, which is similar in a sense that it's also a medical scandal. It's also on a global scale, and that is a wonderful documentary to watch, to understand how these things unfold and how long it takes and how much effort it takes to bring it down. And grooming gangs, I think the point to make there would be that to this date, there are so many politicians and other people in authority opposing any progress in terms of the national inquiry or any justice to be brought to the victims of this scandal, particularly actually in the areas where it originated from, where it's most prominent and most disturbing. Those are the politicians that are most resistant to admit that there were serious mistakes in the past. And the point here, in parallel with the gender, is that if you contact people who are heavily involved in the whole scandal, you might not get the response that you want. You can't really agree with them. The cover-up is likely to continue. So that's why you need to look for people who are interested to read your letter and understand your concerns, and that isn't always who it should be, like medical professionals. So it's not just, does it work? It's all, the question also is it the right thing to do? And I think many parents will find then that it is the right thing to do.
Thank you. That was really, really good. I love your last slide. I think it's a really insightful slide to finish on, because and I do encourage parents to look at, those three particular examples, because you realize how long it is, how the parents, and let's say in the post office, how often, let's say in the grooming gangs, the parents got blamed inappropriately. And in the post office scandal, the worker themselves were each told, oh no, it's just you, each time, again and again. Thankfully, Nick Wallace, who actually broke the post office scandal, is writing a book about this issue. So great hope for that. There is hope, and people are coming, but people are coming every day, more and more people are coming onto our side and understanding what's going on. But it does take time. We're going to look at the questions now in a second. Another one that might be interesting for people to read would be Faust's Gold. It's a book about the doping of teenage girls in Germany from 1974 to, I think, 1989. But it's a good book because it talks about testosterone in detail, and also the doping, like we all knew it was happening. Even I was a kid, everybody knew it was happening. It's one of those extraordinary hiding in plain sight, and yet it passes muster. So there's
these scandals as well. Just sorry to interrupt, but I'm thinking these scandals are good watching and reading material as a family as well, because they're not directly about gender. but they talk about how authorities do get it wrong. They sometimes get it very badly wrong. And when they know that there is a lot of damage already done, they are reluctant to do anything about it or own up to the problem.
Couldn't agree more. It gives the child who's hopefully watching it with you, if you can get an analysis on it, an insight into how groupthink happens. And it gives the parent an understanding of doubling down that happens. So you realize it's not you. It's not you as a parent. You're up against City Hall. You're up against a machine of people who are doubling down left, right, and center, watching themselves, looking after themselves. People are, really, I would say, ruthless in their covering themselves in this context. So it gives you an understanding of what's going on. So we have to look at, there's an awful lot of questions. I don't know how we're going to get through them all.
Yeah, can I just start going back, because there's a lot of repetition, and we know this on this reluctance to participate because the child might know or read that letter, or the gender clinic might share it. And just, we have covered it a little bit, but what I wanted to add to it is the role of the parent is primarily to protect the child, and it extends into adulthood, really. So just like when the child was young and we said no to chocolate every day or something like that, you might be faced with a tantrum and tears and really difficult time. But as a parent, you know that you're doing the right thing long term, not just for the child as they want something today, but for sort of months, years, and decades to come. And sometimes you have to pay that price short term of the tantrum and going through a difficult time to get to where you need to be long term. It's and even more so, for example, just pulling them when they run onto the road, and perhaps pulling them too hard and again causing tears and upset, but you know why you're doing it. And at that point, it doesn't matter that they are upset, that the child is upset, because you know and see better as a parent why you're doing it. And of course, it's different when the child is no longer a child, and they have to learn to take ownership over their decisions, and there is that transition into adulthood during adolescence. It becomes certainly more complicated, but I think it still stands that as a parent, the strongest role you feel is that of protection. And if you know what being physically healthy means because of your life experience, and at 18 you don't really know what it means to go through surgeries properly yet, and what it means to have infection after infection. You don't know at a young age what fertility means in the same way as an adult knows in their 30s and 40s. Then it just seems right to keep that in mind and know that young people just they are not able to see it the same way. And so if the parent doesn't bring that viewpoint, then who will?
Yeah. The parent has a role unlike any other role. With adults, friends, sisters, mothers, the role of the parent to the child is a very specific role. And I do think parents need to take authority in that, and very, very difficult in this context. So there's quite a few questions. Maybe I'll just do a few kind of quick ones and then go into the deeper ones. One, could you clarify the parent survey regarding the answers yes and no? Do the yes answers suggest other underlying mental health issues, and no answer confirm gender confusion?
That's probably the quick survey there. Yeah. The 5-minute one.
Yeah, it was right at the beginning. I was funny, I was going to come in at the time, so maybe I should have.
Yeah, I don't know if I can bring it up quickly. I can't quite remember, is my honest, very quick reflection.
Well, maybe Hermes can put it into the comments, and I'll go to another question. Does the parent complete both surveys or just the parent survey? I think Hermes is writing furiously. Hang on, I'll just see in the chat. And I'll just see if there's one more. Oh yeah, wait, an answer's come in. What was the question? But the first question I'll read out now. Hang on a second. And
I'll go back to the first one, perhaps. So in the very short version, the 5-minute version, the questions are, for example, ADHD or ADD, yes or no. So is there one or is there none?
Yeah.
Is that present? So yes is
yes if your child has ADHD,
for example,
yes.
and no if there isn't
Exactly.
anything like that.
And so no answer. So if it was something about gender distress, you would say yes, there is, if there is, and no, if there isn't. So it's what it says on the tin, really. But does the parent, Hermes, does the parent complete both surveys or just the parent survey? I'll just see if the answer there. Yeah. Is there an answer to that? Does the parent complete both surveys or just the parent survey?
I think they're sort of separate phases. So you can complete parent survey and it's just the parents, or you can complete a full version, which parents can complete and family and friends can complete as well.
And that goes to my next question, is which I'm just going to preface with, it's your survey to do with as you please. It doesn't have the strict instructions that if you complete one and other people don't complete it, it all collapses. It's not written like that. It's a piece of added information to add to your child's file, bigger or larger, bigger or smaller. You know what I mean? It might be just a small piece because you might be the only person who filled it in, or it might be a much bigger, serious file. So if somebody says here, if a parent doesn't have 12 people to participate, is there a minimum you recommend in order to make it persuasive to the clinic? Alternatively, is 3 or 4 better than none? So yes, 3 or 4 is better than none, I would, for starters. But secondly, some people have very small families and some people have massive families. So, it very much depends on the context of the person's family.
And it may be that once 3 or 4 are completed, more ideas come to mind about school friends, childhood friends, and people you've not seen for decades. And you discover those other options as you start working on it.
And as well as that, parent does the parent survey, the family and friends do the long one, and the parents can do the long one too. And I want to go back up on a few other longer questions now. So, reluctance to participate. Friends or family members often refuse to take part in the survey because they don't want to do it behind the child's back. In that case, you can complete it yourself on their behalf and indicate them as family member X by proxy. So, for example, there might be a sibling who's young and is like, this is also, the way the family politics can be fraught. You can say, younger sister, 14, has given me permission to complete it. I'm completing it on her behalf, and you write it and you do it. You know what I mean? So you like I say, you make it your own. That's your job as such, rather than being intimidated by the rules. You take this as your own and you shape it to your family's needs. Informing the child. This is a huge question that so many of you have asked already. It's worth considering whether to tell your child that you plan to submit the survey or to keep it private and later present it directly to the clinic. Of course, open communication is preferable, but it carries the risk that your child might exclude you in advance and the clinic might then refuse to involve you. So I would be pro telling the child. I'm generally pro. I know there's a lot of groupthink among the parents of saying less to the child. I am not really encouraging of that. I know everybody says the relationship. It's very, very similar to anorexia in its arc. And when you've got an anorexic in the house, they're perfectly fine so long as you're not getting in the way of their not eating. And so they're actually quite pleasant. And the second you start saying, would you eat more, they become demonic, arguably. That's a descriptive word rather than an actual word. And equally for the gender dysphoric. But I would rather that you go to the distress and say, this is a survey. You don't have to read it. If you don't want. It does indicate the measure of my love for you, that I'm taking it deadly serious. And it's a full analysis of you. You're more than welcome to read it or not. You're more than welcome to disagree. You're more than welcome to fill in your own version. Make it your own. But I'm more into if it's all possible, to say more than less. And I think parents are inclined to say less because of the very heavy, intense pressure from the child to silence the parents. Never underestimate the ability for somebody. Frankly, I see it a lot with mentally ill people to silence everybody in the room. I remember my friend, and she had an anorexic sister, and she sat in the side bar of the kitchen while everybody else ate Christmas dinner around the dining room table, and she sat like hunched over her lettuce, and nobody of the 14 people in the Christmas table managed to say, why are you sitting over there eating lettuce while we're all sitting eating the Christmas dinner? Because of that ability to silence everybody. It's phenomenal. Never underestimate it. Sorry,
I
I'm off.
think an interesting point here also is about the letters that are never sent. I know that a lot of parents are writing letters, emails, messages that they don't then send to their children because of various reasons. And there is something to be said if someone's on the fence about starting filling out this survey and just seeing how it goes, seeing if it's helpful. At that point, there is no necessary pressure or commitment to just actually send it. It might be that just the process of collecting that information is helpful in itself, and speaking to the child about it is also an important step that might just help in its own right, even without then sending it to the gender clinic.
Yeah, very good point.
It is scary, though. It is scary to be talking to someone. And I think partly it's also because of how many parents were already let down by people like CAMS, GP, or some other people in authority where they feel that they're not listened to, that people just shut them down. And then there becomes this, you develop this response that you expect that kind of behavior to happen again, even when perhaps it might not do. And responses from family and friends will probably illustrate that actually this shutting down of all arguments isn't as widespread as you might expect based on your previous traumatic experiences.
Wow, you're right. So another one, you can still submit the survey even if you aren't invited to by the clinic. The clinic is obliged to accept it and include it in the medical file, as it contains relevant information that must be considered. And that's why we believe it has to make a difference. And I'm going to speak on that in a second. Think of it as similar to a suicidal risk situation. When a partner calls the GP about a suicidal loved one, the GP is required to treat that information seriously and record it in the medical file. The same principle applies here. And so some people are saying, well, why? What's the point? And I'm saying, well, there's a few points. One, we don't know who is disaffected on the team. We don't know who we're speaking to. You might know there's 3 zealots. You don't know the whole team. Rarely do you know everybody's mind and what they're saying and thinking. You don't know what will tip them. You don't know what will be the straw that breaks the camel's back. You don't know what will open somebody's eyes. You don't know the morning they've just had that might hit in the right way. So I think it's worth it. Secondly, you're adding it to the file. And maybe when somebody comes to review it at the right time, they'll look at this and go, hang on, this is confirming everything I know about this child. And maybe this individual, and maybe they would suggest a different path as a result. And thirdly, if you ever do take a claim or take a case, you've got information and you've filed it and it's there and it's noted. And immediately, if I received that, I'm on notice. That's what it's called. I'm on notice. From the moment that arrives onto my desk, up your game is what's being said there. That might as well be emblazoned on it. And so I want that. I want that for every single one of them. Do you know what I mean? That they think, whoa, I better be careful here. And I'm like, yeah, you would want to be careful. Don't do any reckless decisions here. They all have to be very considered and filed, and because now you're on notice.
Another good question that I would like us to consider and maybe jump to ahead of some others is when to do this, whether sort of ahead of the first appointment is the best time, or whether it's still useful to do it even after the gender clinic has seen this person and potentially even started on a medical pathway, is this still a good time then?
Go on. And what do you think?
And I think it could be. I think it's much, much harder to get the strength and the energy to do it at that point when so much damage has been done already. But it's still as important information as at any other point, that this is what the family and friends are observing and knowing about this person. And potentially in that scenario where it's been submitted further down the line, it's essentially communicated, and have you bothered to collect this information or think about these things? And if not, why not?
Yeah. And because it's centered around the DSM diagnosis, you're not rogue. You're just enthusiastic and assiduous. And just remember that rather than feeling shamed, you're the one who's being clinical and forensic here. So when the child as an adult has come in for quite a few questions, the survey remains relevant even for adult cases. A proper differential diagnosis requires the clinician to consider all available information. For instance, the wife of a 45-year-old man could submit the Genspect survey to demonstrate that her husband may be distorting facts in his self-report. If the clinic ignores such information and post-transition complications occur, the survey can make that clinic legally vulnerable in potential regret or malpractice lawsuit. So you see, it's killing a lot of birds with one stone, this, and that's why we're so into it, because it has a multi kind of factorial reason to carry it out. Another question, is there any guarantee that the fact that we completed the form will be kept confidential from our children or adults? I answered that already. I don't think you can work on that basis that it will be. I prefer that you tell the child, even if they're an adult child, that it's your genuine wish for the better care, and you've heard about some shoddy care.
I think people are trying to predict what will happen next and next and next, and you can almost sort of hypothesize to an unhealthy degree and think, let's say, if this letter is submitted and the child knows, then they might not go to this gender clinic and they will choose a different one. But no one can predict the future to that level. Potentially going to a new gender clinic is quite stressful and more work, and maybe the child will never get to that point. It's impossible to know what will happen in the future. I think it's probably easier to just do the right thing and know that you've done the right thing, and what the future holds, you just don't really know, do you? Because no one does.
Yeah, I love what you said there. Another question came in. My husband and I have just been hit with this madness by our 24-year-old son. I urge you to contact Genspect and get some further information and maybe go to some meetings. You're going to learn an awful lot in the coming weeks, and I'm dreadfully sorry. It'll be very hard. We're trying to complete the parental survey, and we're confused about the question and answers. My husband thinks all the answers should be no, because that means he never experienced it, therefore he would not be suffering from gender dysphoria. Whereas my thoughts are the more yes shows he has other underlying issues that would need to be considered. Could you clarify how to complete it? Maybe Hermes has an answer to that point, but certainly I have my own thoughts, which I'm just going to say off the top, which would be, my inclination is, if your son has other issues, that should be in his file, i.e. if he has autistic traits, if he has ADHD, if he has suspected but undiagnosed autism. I don't see how that goes against the fact that he has other issues and therefore he should be medicalizing. I would say, yeah, he has other issues and therefore he should be not medicalizing. I think the truth will set you free on this. If you're saying that he was a feminine boy all along and you're afraid that will lead to transition, I suppose that's not the way the survey is created. The presumption is that other issues will create a differential diagnosis, and that should be read.
I think this is one of those instances where perhaps just writing down observations like you're suggesting, Stella, and seeing what happens will bring you much more peace. Just actually seeing it on paper. Just write down what actually is happening and what you're truly observing and what is or isn't there. And I think seeing it on paper will probably put your mind at ease, because that's just the truth. That's all it needs doing. You don't need to second guess how this will impact any future decisions.
I really like that. I think leaning in on the truth is very important. I really like what the survey writer also added, Hermes. He said, just be honest and explain in a letter that the husband sees A and the wife sees B. Because people have often, and I know a few people in the chat talked about the husband having a very different response to the wife. By the way, I think I'm releasing an article today on Spiked about the men and the men's response to trans issues and the massive lack of men in this. I have all sorts of reasons about why I believe the men have stayed out of this issue, and it's in Spiked, I think, today. But I think be very, very, very careful of your marriage. This can rupture marriages. Arguably, something devastating has happened to the family. Make sure you look after your marriage, because you don't want a tragedy upon a tragedy. So, have the freedom to do it your way. And so if your husband wants to fill it in that way, but the truth is the one thing that I'd say that's imperative. Anyway. So another person has said the same. Oh, no, that's that.
It's quite a similar one. There is a similar one worded differently, like whether it's almost second guessing. If I fill it out in this way, would that guarantee it more that medicalization isn't necessary? And I think it's there's a lot of heavy thinking there that is completely unnecessary, really.
Yeah. You're overthinking it. Fill in the truth. If your child is, very sensitive, has suspected autism, has, been on antidepressants, I don't see a problem in you adding whatever you needed to add there. That doesn't mean that they need to be medicalized for gender dysphoria. I think the more information you could put in that is clinical and factual and truthful, the more they have to take you seriously. That would be is that how you feel?
Yeah.
How useful would the survey be for parents of children who've already commenced hormone treatment? I saw quite a lot of you ask that. I think it would be useful, because there's so much ambivalence. I meet so many people who have started T and then they go off it and then they go back on it and then they go off it, but they don't tell people that they've gone on it and off it. I see them in the groups. I've met so many detransitioners that made me realize detransition it's very like giving up alcohol or drugs. It's not the first time you give up. It's not the second time you give up. It's lots of times and then they give up. So somebody will say, I say to them, give us your, quick history. And they might say, I medicalized, when I was 19, and then I stopped when I was 22 for 6 months. And then I went back on, stayed until 24. Then I pulled out again for a year, actually, but then I went back on. That's very common. So therefore, yes, because you don't know actually what's going down in the clinic. Very often you don't know that they might be on a break. You never know what's actually going on. Should parents add any previous medical reports of the children? I think so. I think it adds to the...
Yeah, if it's relevant, why not? And also, particularly with assessments of autism and all the fixations and special interests, sometimes, well, I would say maybe even often, it is also illustrating gender stereotype preferences, if that makes sense. So completely by chance, if the child was diagnosed with autism, let's say at age 10, and then at age 20 decided they want to identify as trans, then in that report from a 10-year-old, there might be things there that this boy just played with cards every bloody day.
I know.
Wasn't interested in anything else, let alone
yeah, exactly.
Also anything like that.
So does the parent complete both surveys or just the parent survey? They do complete the parent survey. They can complete the other one as well if they want. If a parent doesn't have 12 people, is there a minimum? 12 is an awful lot. Very few will have 12. So no. Don't be thinking you have to reach 12. You can be, some of you have tiny families, some of you have huge families. To me, 4 would be strong, 6 would be great, 8 would be phenomenal. That's how I would read it. But if you've only 2, send 2. Is 3 or 4 better than none? 100% 3 or 4 is better than none. A lot better than none. Am I getting mixed up of this? We already sent our child's clinic a letter detailing our child's history of mental health struggles, working with therapists over the years to address anxiety, body dysmorphia, and OCD, and requesting that more traditional treatment approaches such as CBT, DBT, and ERP be undertaken prior to referring for gender-affirming surgery. Given our circumstances, do you recommend the use of the survey for us? Yes, I very much recommend the use of the survey for you. You've already sent it, and now this is a more formalized, not constant, but good quality contact with the clinic makes you a force to be reckoned with. Not this sprawling, I'm ringing you every 10 seconds and you're going to be known as a crank, but these people are serious. They're watching me at my work, and I'm going to make sure that I carry out better work than normal. That's what I want them to be thinking. Anything else? How can my husband and I get on the same page? My husband believes if we push our adult son to do the survey, he would do the opposite out of spite. You do know your own child. You're a world expert in your child. So we don't know.
There's one other option where, when children are younger, we all used as parents to good cop, bad cop scenario where one parent says, no, you are not doing this. And the child gets upset, but they have the other parent to go to and say, oh, mom, you said this, that, and the other, can you? Which is probably not a bad thing, because there should be some sort of way out of this miserable position of being punished or told off. So in this scenario, there may be a good cop and bad cop, and one person submitted the survey and responses, and the other parent just stays aside and is the one to confide in if necessary.
I fully agree with you on that one. I fully agree with leaning into the good cop, bad cop, freeze people. One person's taken a hit for the team. But I think that person has asked something slightly different, which is the actual trans-identified kid to do the survey or something, and whatever. Yeah, but the second question I think is a lovely point, and I think we might take up on this. Have you ever thought of designing a questionnaire to be shared with the child as a communications tool, maybe similar to a family intervention?
That's a great idea.
Lovely. Yeah,
I think that's really, really good. And I do agree with your earlier comment where some young people might actually take to the structure of it.
Yes. What I find working with those kids is A, they are genuinely very distressed. B, I would argue they've chosen what many believe is an absurd solution. And so C, people don't take it seriously enough. And they are frantic with distress that people aren't taking them seriously enough. You get a good, serious survey like that is weighty and intelligent, and it's like, I am taking you seriously. I'm taking you deadly serious, because that fear of being waved away it mortifies them. Because I think there's an element that they're of truth, maybe, that they're not acknowledging. I think it's a really nice idea, and I think we're going to think about that quite seriously. Is it possible to send our letters to be critiqued? We've got a lot of work on. So I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. You'd have to. Can I not take that one? Is all I'm thinking. I'm sure, honestly.
There are parent groups where people are talking about this and helping each other, and some groups specifically set up to kind of polish the letters and wording. It should be possible to find a good support network for this. I don't think we are at a time in the society where it's impossible to find someone to help you write it anymore. But that was the case earlier on, maybe 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Things were different.
The groups are great. There's so many. You know, we have our own group at Genspect, thousands of parents on it. There's Bayswater, thousands of parents. There's Our Duty. There's just so many resources now. And obviously Transgender Trend gives great support. There's so many resources, parents of RGD kids. So what I would say, and there's so many, too many to name. And so what I would say is, A, you're right. Look to support in the groups. Somebody will help you out. And B, don't forget a ChatGPT, like, help me out here. I want to say this and I want to say that. Like, somebody else said in a comment, ChatGPT gives fake responses. You can tell ChatGPT what to do and say, no, you're doing it wrong.
A good question is half the answer, isn't it? Knowing that you just need help with writing it.
Yeah.
You will find an answer to that. You will find a way of support. And I think support is important here because it's I don't know, it's a very dry job, and most parents would rather not do it if they had a choice, really. It's not the most exciting project, is it?
And it's distressing. And if you had a very good friend who was also, because a lot of you have become friends, and I'm very glad you have, you could swap surveys. I'll fill out yours, you could fill out mine, because you can fix it. Don't forget, you can fix it then. You know what I mean? It's not.
I think what we could do, perhaps, Stella, what you might want to consider, rather than critiquing individual letters, which would be quite time consuming, maybe coming up with a rough template and the structure of what could be raised so that it feels more like parents are filling in the structure of the letter already, as opposed to starting from a blank sheet of paper, which is harder.
I think you're right. And I think we probably will. We've been resisting it because we don't want people to copy it. And your own words are strong. You're good enough in your own way. You don't have to be, sophisticated about this. Getting the true, authentic words of the parent can be so powerful. I find it myself because I get the emails. So don't underestimate the authenticity of the actual parent. What is the end goal of...
Just one final thought on that. I think it's also that the times are changing, and many parents are in this for many years, and they are perhaps stuck in a sort of inertia kind of way, in a place and time where you had to think, rethink, write and rewrite and make absolutely sure that this is so completely accurate and just the best it can be. I don't think this is the time we are in now. If anyone watched the interview of Ben Leo with Helen Weberly, that was done in a very casual way, if that makes sense. There was none of that over preparation and anxiety of saying the wrong thing on a slightly inaccurate thing. It was just a conversation. And I think many people are switching to that more normal and more natural tone and attitude, as opposed to preparing everything until it's absolutely 100% perfect.
Yeah, I agree with you. What is the end goal if we send the survey and letter to the clinic? Is it for the clinic to stop writing prescriptions? It's for the clinic to wake up that there's a person here who's very vulnerable, who has lots of other issues, arguably, that are not being attended to, and that need to be differential diagnosis needs to be carried out so that they look after these issues rather than going straight to medical transition as some sort of cure-all, because it's not worked out as a cure-all. Secondly, it's for the clinics to sit up straight and realize that they're being watched by somebody who's taking it very seriously, and they better not be carrying out shoddy treatment on your child. Do you want to add anything to that?
Just holistic care, really, as well, isn't it? That's the whole point of all of this, saying some things have been happening and other things haven't been happening. Can you make sure that whatever medical care you're proposing is actually fitting with the information that you now have?
Okay.
So potentially, for example, maybe there's a need for help in terms of understanding autism, first of all, and then other things are less important.
Please forgive us if we don't get to all of them. I'm doing my best. And how useful is it for parents who only want to ask for the surgeon for more time? Interesting. I kind of think everything about this survey is asking for attention. And so if that's what you're asking, you know what I mean? Like you're just trying to flag. It's an added piece of information into your child's file. And it's an added piece of information that is structured and serious and is adding some questions that arguably have not been addressed. So it's not a magic wand to ask for more time for surgery. It is, I would say, a powerful intervention that says to the clinic, you had want to be, carrying out good treatment here because we don't believe that this should go forward.
Yeah.
In a way, it's an alarm bell. That's what it is. I see it as.
I think it's likely to buy more time because that's what you're asking for. Can you please be careful when you're considering this? There might be information you're missing here. Think about it again. That's what you're asking, isn't it? And that is likely to buy more time.
If it had a subject title, it would be, there might be information you're missing here and you need to address it first. Somebody asked again, and I'll just reiterate it again. What if extended family members do not want to sign the questionnaire because they fear losing their relationship with the adult daughter? You could fill it in by proxy. You could say, well, I'll fill it in on your behalf. So, it is a valid point, and I'd say a lot of them will be, So that
but
would
also
be how
keep
you
looking for people who can and want to fill it in.
Yeah. And
what is the best parent group?
Well, no, to get your child to consider detransitioning. Everybody's trying to get their child to detransition. It's like, do we have the magic wand? These are very, very often very indoctrinated, zealous kids who are really deeply involved. So their ability for anybody to speak to them is really quite limited in a society that is kind of propelling them along. There's loads of different resources. I would be very heavily into, your child. And one child, you imagine if you've got 3 kids, you'd say, I'm that sort of parent with that kid, and I'm that sort of parent with that kid. And so be careful thinking that there's going to be one group that does it right. It's more for your kid, you're finding the right, approaches, and there might be many. That would be my feeling. Yeah. God, there's so many coming in. We're way overwhelmed with this.
It seems like people are interested in doing something like this, that it is a helpful tool.
Yeah, without a doubt. There's over 600 people watching. My husband believes the yes answers confirm he's trans. No, the truth. There's no confirming of trans anyway. So no, that your husband needs to read around this a lot more. So saying that the child has other mental health issues is not confirming anybody is trans. This is not the way this. Would you like to answer a little bit on that? Because I think that's coming at it the wrong way.
It's not quite clear what question this person was referring to when asking the question. I wonder if it's more about gender non-conforming behavior, where they're saying yes, that son or daughter had not gender non-conforming behavior, that if you say yes to that might confirm they're trans. Maybe that's what was meant by that question. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah. And
but I would say no. I would say no, it doesn't mean that at all.
Yeah, and page 8 of the survey explains this, that the diagnosis is controversial, that the DSM is reliant on stereotypical behavior, frankly, based in the 1950s, and that when you read the survey, you go, whoa, this is, when you think about it deeply enough, and the survey invites you to think about it deeply enough. So imagine you've got a clinician who's shallow, and he's not going in deep at all. And then this survey arrives and it's deep and he's led in deeper. You're putting questions, I would say, into very often quite shallow thinking people. And
informed consent in particular, that page that lists all the side effects and everything, that does make a lot of people think. So I think when parents are actually starting to do it, they might form a different view than they have by just glancing at it very quickly, very briefly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a bit much calling other people absurd. I think it's very, very important that we are all free to call ideas, positions absurd if they are. And I don't think it's helpful to kind of comment on the language rather than the concepts behind them. I think it's more appropriate to talk about concepts behind them. The fact is that people have been devastated by detransition. We hold, and we're going to be holding more. We hold about 4, I think, a week now, meetings for people who regret their medical transition. And the stories are harrowing. And they, all of them, consistently wish people had been straighter with them. They wish they'd had straight talking. They wish they had people not dancing around language and saying, oh, dare I say this and dare I say that. They now have often, impaired sexual functioning, incontinence, huge health complications. And so playing around with language is frankly luxury beliefs. It's luxury conversation when we're actually talking about something really, really serious. And what we're trying to do is add to the body of knowledge with a very serious survey that would add to the clinic's knowledge base. And too many clinics have been reported by too many people for carrying out very superficial diagnosis and treatment. And so what we're trying to do is push it into a more appropriate and comprehensive treatment plan by providing truthful information to the clinic about your child from their family and friends and loved ones. And so if somebody has an issue with language, I would just say, yeah, maybe you need to think a little bit deeper. Anything else? Is this information going to be used in US class action lawsuits? I don't see, it could be maybe in the future, people could use it for their own lawsuit against the clinic if they think malpractice was or medical fraud was carried out. You could use it without a doubt.
But immediately when you're writing the letter, that's what you're kind of hinting at, isn't it? That's the whole power of it, that you say, there's someone here writing down what happened, when it happened, how it happened. And those people, family and friends, will probably carry on doing that, making notes. So
there was somebody whose child hasn't got into the Beyond Trans meeting yet. So yeah, they are very definitely very welcome. We get a lot of emails. We get a lot. So there's a process for people to be invited to join. So we'll get at that and we'll answer them as soon as possible. I'm sorry if there's been a delay. We do run, for those of you who don't know, of course we run parent groups, but we run a lot of open groups. These are for people who have detransitioned. They're all over 18, people who are ambivalent about their medical transition, and people who are identified as trans. So anybody who's identified as trans and who has attended this meeting, you're very welcome, and you're very welcome to join these groups and meet detransitioners and meet people who regret their medical transition and who have a lot to say, because you'll find that you have a lot in common with them because they've been through the trans identification. Some of them, medicalized decades ago. Some of them medicalized last year. Some of them detransitioned decades ago. Some of them detransitioned last week. So it's a huge mix. But anybody who's thinking of transitioning and is on this call, I urge you to look up beyondtrans.org and search within yourself if you're not willing to meet detransitioners and people who are ambivalent about their experiences, because really, we should always look at the monster under the rug. It makes us feel better in our psyche. It makes us feel better in our way of going forward. And so I think it's very important. Will we finish it soon? Is there much more to say? There's one thing that the survey writer added. If there is non-conforming behavior, this is not a legitimate reason for trans medicalization. Atypical behavior can occur for entirely different reasons, which cannot be differentiated through the overly simplistic and flawed DSM-5 criteria. The clinic must demonstrate how it has differentiated, though it is expected they cannot do so, as no methods exist to measure this. First do no harm takes precedence over medicalizing the indeterminate. Well said. Very, very well said. And I do want to point out, I was a very gender non-conforming child for many, many years. I was persistent, insistent, and consistent for years. And I defy anybody to find me as a kid and say, I was what would now be considered a very, very convincing trans kid had you met me at the time. And I grew out of it, and I'm glad that I didn't medically transition. I'm glad I've left that particular demon behind. I think I'm lucky that I didn't change my body, because I could have, I'm very aware of could have. Anything else? We had our letter sent out by an attorney, even though he has no legal standing. It made the clinic take it seriously. That's very interesting. In case of contacting the surgeon with the lawyer, you would not add it. I think I would always add it. He would sue the parents in return for breaking data protection rules. Do you understand that one?
I suppose, is it alluding at information that is about the child, that is confidential or private, but your observations as a parent in order to help the medical pathway, that doesn't fall into that category.
Yeah. And somebody else said, will Scottish clinics accept this too? All clinics will accept it. They have to accept it. Once you've sent it, you have laid a problem on their door, and that's why we like it. Because as soon as you've sent it, you've sent a piece of information that's tangible, that's traceable, that you have recorded, that is saying, I'm taking you seriously. The DSM advises and recommends that you take into account family and friends' views. Well, here's families and friends' views. Here you go. Now you have to accept it. So it doesn't matter where you are. In Timbuktu, they have to accept it once you submit it. So do.
There's a mention of cosmetic surgery. That's an interesting one, isn't it, in the questions? Because it's worse, isn't it, than cosmetic surgery? When you are doing a cosmetic surgery on your nose, it doesn't remove the function of your nose to work as previously. This changes the way the body looks, but it also removes the function at the same time. It's really quite something else.
It's extreme body modification that impairs your health. So while it has similarities with cosmetic surgery, the difference is it impedes your functioning. And so it's not the same. It is going into, it's actually hurting you. But arguably, it certainly shouldn't be called healthcare, And the person who messaged us to say that their attorney sent it, made the clinic take it seriously, could you contact us, and we would like to just do a little write-up on that, because I think that would be helpful for people. Yeah. Okay, I think that's anything you want to add at the end to finish us up?
It's been brilliant. I think that's been a really good discussion. Thank you, Stella, for making the time and going through it in detail, and hope it helps.
Yeah, I hope it helps. I think we're going to take on board that brilliant suggestion about something to do with the children. So we may have another one. We've lots of other parents series to come. We've lots of parent webinars to come. So I hope you get in touch with us, or keep an eye out for any other future webinars. If you join Genspect, you'll be told about it, and that would be the easiest. We don't spam you though, so don't worry. Thank you all very much for coming, and any constructive comments are always very welcome, so please send them.
Have a great day, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.